First of all, I would like to define poverty as an economic condition by the lack of both money and basic necessities needed to successfully live, such as food, water, utilities, housing. Lack of income security, economic stability, and the predictability of one's continued means to meet basic needs all serve as the absolute indicators of poverty. Poverty may be, therefore, also be defined as the economic condition of lacking predictable and stable means of meeting basic needs of life. Today, less than 10% of the world population lives in extreme poverty. Based on information about basic needs collected from 15 low-income countries, the World Bank defines the extreme poor as those living on less than $1.90 a day. At this parameter, about 13% of Indian population live below the extreme poverty line. While on the basis of $5.50 a day in 2011 international PPP prices, though Indian government is running many programs to alleviate poverty, such as wage employment, self-employment, food security, social security, and other poverty alleviations. United Nations in Agenda 21 to future, we want accord the highest priority to poverty eradication within its development agenda, addressing the root causes and challenges of poverty through integrated, coordinated, and coherent strategies at all levels. Poverty eradication is addressed in Chapter 2 of the Johannesburg Plan of Implementation, which stressed that eradicating poverty is the greatest global challenge facing the world today and an indispensable requirement for sustainable development, particularly for developing nations. In this direction, there are many priority actions on poverty eradication. The first sustainable goal aims to end poverty in all its forms, everywhere. Its 7 associated targets aims, among others, to eradicate extreme poverty for all people everywhere. Millennium Development Goals Report 2015 states that 189 countries unanimously adopted the Millennium Declaration, pledging to spare no effort to free our fellow men, women, and children from the abject and dehumanizing conditions of extreme poverty. Now, I would like to draw the attention of researchers to assess the impact of COVID-19 on the ongoing efforts to entitlement of food and eradication of poverty. Before COVID-19, the number of people classified as poor was approximately 2.1 billion. Of this number, 767 million were found to be living in extreme poverty. The extent of the damage caused by COVID-19 to world economy is yet to be determined. The pandemic threatens not only to erase past gains, but also to force an additional half a billion of the world population into poverty. Dear participants, in the concluding note, as studies suggest that state must focus on enhancement of entitlement to food to all, particularly the poor, infirm, and marginalized sections of the society. Improved access to food through increased agriculture productivity and production will be the right strategy to meet the needs of food of the world's growing population. Major, Major part of the poor's income is spent on food, and they are left with bare minimum to fulfill other basic needs. Public distribution system in India is a good example in this direction that enhance people's entitlement to food and other basic needs. It ensures sufficient food to poor and other marginalized sections. National Food Security Act of India provides for grains entitlement to 75% of the rural population with a minimum of 46% households as priority. Successful food security and poverty-oriented programs not only assist poor to produce more and diversified products, but to produce a surplus that can be marketed and thereby generate income for the purpose of improving quality of life through improved diet and nutrition. Poverty and malnourishment due to inaccessible food are some of the worst issues that the world is facing from a long time. Government should tie up with citizens, volunteers, and strive to remove hunger without a trace. Finally, respected delegates and participants, we hope this webinar will be successful with your cooperation. Deliberations from resource persons will prove assets for researchers. It will guide the policymakers and government to enhance entitlement to food and poverty eradication. Academicians will exchange their views, which will be beneficial for our budding researchers. As we all know that this is a universal topic for research, as last year Abhijit Banerjee got Nobel Prize in this field. Our motto to taking efforts to organize this webinar is to ensure sustained sufficient supply of food to all. That will be a milestone in eradicating absolute poverty. With this, I once again welcome one and all. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. I request our Honorable Principal Dr. Aftab Anwar Sheikh to give the presidential address.
Good evening to one and all. I take this opportunity to welcome the dignitaries, chief guest for today's inaugural function, Mr. Segun Solomon from Nigeria and Mr. Anish Chakrabarti. I can also see Ms. Carrie Gard from Argentina. We have with us Vice Principal Professor Moinuddin Khan, Dr. Shahid Jamal Ansari, Head of the Department, Dr. Vidya Sagar, Rifat Memon, all heads of the department, faculty members, journalists, press reporters, my colleagues and dear participants who are there from all across the globe and India. It is an honor and a privilege for me to extend a warm welcome to all the dignitaries and the delegates present here for this webinar. Once again, we all are here to witness the gigantic international webinar on entitlement of food and poverty eradication, organized by the Department of Economics and Postgraduate Research Center. We would like to bring the scholars from all over the world who are doing research in this area on a common platform to share and discuss their research work and findings so that we all are mutually benefited. Today we have with us Mr. Solomon, who is a great orator and who is always motivating youth all over the globe for the Sustainable Development Goals. This webinar will provide a platform to thrive upon the ideas and research done by the intellectuals of the society and among researchers and practitioners in universities and industries, and to seek opportunities for collaboration among the participants. I am very much delighted and I take pride and feel privileged to welcome one and all for this webinar. We are indeed honored to have all of you here with us. I am very much confident that this webinar will be an amalgamation of interesting discussions and thoughtful exchanges for constructive ideas. The interactions among so many distinguished researchers will certainly rise to positive externalities and produce seed to new knowledge for which we particularly appreciative. This webinar will definitely give a direction to all, and I hope there will be external deliberations among various sessions. I am very much thankful to Dr. Solomon, to Mr. Chakrabarti, and all the research persons coming from various countries and joining here today with us. On behalf of Pune College and our Trust Anjuman Karul Islam, I extend a heartiest welcome to you all and hope that we will be continue to have your blessings, good wishes, and wholehearted support. Friends, today we have this World Food Day. On this occasion, various people and the Secretary General of UN, he has also given his address. This day is a very important day. The member countries of the Food and Agriculture Organizations established World Food Day in November 1979 at the organization's 20th General Conference and called for the observation of World Food Day on 16th October 1981. This decision was ratified by the UN General Assembly on 5th December 1980 and urged governments and international, national and local organizations to contribute to celebrating World Food Day. Since 1981, World Food Day has been held every year. Friends, we all are here. Once again, I appreciate the hard work of all the faculty members of Department of Economics, especially Dr. Shahid Jamal Ansari, Rifat Memon, Mr. Dr. Vidyasagar, Gul Nawaz, and all other faculty members, Dr. Anna, and student volunteer team for working day and night for the success of this webinar and providing excellent facilities. Thank you very much. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir. Now I call upon Dr. Gulnawaz Usmani to introduce our speaker.
Thank you, Rifat Madam, for giving me this opportunity to introduce today's guest of the day. First, I introduce Dr. Segun Solomon. Dr. Segun Solomon is a young international leader with a strong interest in advocating for quality education and initiating community development. Dr. Solomon is the CEO of Penguin Educational and Content Management Services. Dr. Solomon launched Mahatma King Initiative in June 2020 and is also an associate director of British Wales Youth Development Initiative with United Nations for the Sustainable Development Goals. Mr. Solomon has deep involvement in student unionism, first as the academic secretary of Senate and eventually as the Senate president. Sir is a double Academic Excellence Award winning graduate of Biology and Chemistry from Austin State College of Education. Dr. Solomon's latest drive and impact are being driven via International Youth Alliance for Social Impact, a global youth-led community development organization. Sir, thank you very much for accepting our invitation, and I welcome you to this today's international webinar. Our other guest of the day is Anish Chakravarti. Mr. Anish Chakravarti is an assistant professor at Department of Philosophy, Kamla Nehru College, University of Delhi, India. Mr. Chakravarti is also doing his PhD in the Department of Philosophy, University of Delhi, India. Mr. Anish did his MA in Philosophy from Hindu College, University of Delhi in 2011. Mr. Anish did his BA in Philosophy from Zakir Hussain College, University of Delhi, India. Mr. Anish has published a good number of research papers in the national and international reputed journals. Mr. Anish has awarded Certificate of Merit for MA Philosophy in 2000 during the batch of 2009 and 11. Mr. Anish has won the Trophy of Academic Excellence in 2012. Sir, I welcome you to this today's international webinar. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Gulnawaz, sir. Now I request our chief guest and speaker, Mr. Segun Solomon, to enlighten our participant with his expertise.
Oh, wow. I should celebrate and appreciate Pune College for this amazing work. This is a lot. And I think the world owes you a lot. The world owes India a lot of appreciation for always bringing up initiatives as this. So on behalf of the world, I want to say thank you to Pune College. I want to say thank you to Professor Haftab. Please permit me to say briefly something about Professor Haftab. To me, he has been a motivation. He has been, I see him as a mentor, a distant mentor at that, and he has been a whole lot of a source of inspiration to me as far as, engagement in social works and stuff related to this is concerned. So I want to appreciate you once again, and I want to take this time to appreciate the people, the brains behind this initiative. I believe this is an initiative brought up by a department in the college out there. And I want to take this time to also appreciate Dr. Shahid. He has been a very lovely man. I've never met him in person, but he has been a very lovely man, through the conversation we had. So I want to appreciate, sorry, I love appreciating people, so don't mind me. Okay, so Dr. Vidya Sagar, if I pronounce that name correctly, and absolutely everybody here today, and my honorable madam for Madam Rifat, yeah, for hosting me today. I want to appreciate everybody. And I would also take this privilege to appreciate people who joined us from IASI. That's the International Youth Alliance for Social Impact. They got this invitation on an impromptu basis, and they still find the time to join. I can see a friend of mine from Argentina, Ms. Carigad. Hello to you. So from here, I will start with an introduction into the concepts of what the theme for this conference is. This conference has the theme as, the impact of COVID-19 on poverty eradication and hunger eradication. I should say poverty and, hunger eradication. So talking about food distribution and accessibility to all. I would draw her attention back to something very important. There is nothing we want to discuss today that is not solely connected to the Sustainable Development Goals of the United Nations. And we all must understand that when we say sustainable development, we mean something that is done not just for the present need, but even for the futuristic needs. That shows that there is a lot going on in the world at this period. And it's so surprising to see that at a time when the world is, when the world is trying to ensure that and implemented to combat all the problems identified as being common to the universe, to the world. This is when we now have, the inception of COVID-19. And COVID-19 came. COVID-19 was so bad, it's not so nice. It doesn't stay back in its origin. It went on, so virulently to affect all nations of the world. So, but there is nothing we can do about it. And last night, while I was still trying to prepare the document I was going to use for this session, I was ruminating, and I got to have this, this thought about COVID-19. I felt like sincerely COVID-19 has proved to the world that there is nothing, no matter how big, that cannot be affected by the slightest occurrence. Look at it. COVID-19, a single disease, is affecting several sectors of the world. It's affecting the economic system. It's affecting every sector. And now I was making reference to the Sustainable Development Goals of the United Nations. And I want to start by sharing my screen to just give us an overview of what the Sustainable Development Goals are. I believe we all must have known about this, but I wouldn't take, I wouldn't take that assumption. So now this is the Sustainable Development Goals. It has a tag on it, the 17 goals to transform our world. That shows that the world is actually in a process of being transformed by setting up some goals and pursuing them vibrantly. And another point where I would actually take my appreciation from, as far as the theme of this conference is concerned, is the fact that the college actually picked these days, celebrating this universally. And then we have no poverty being the first one. and then zero hunger. So the world is in the process of accomplishing these goals. And we shouldn't forget that these goals have their targets. They have targets under them. For instance, goal number 2, zero hunger, has 5 different targets under it. The first target there is to ensure that everybody has equal access to food, equal distribution of food, and also that the foods that are distributed to men are not just food for but foods that are good enough to give nourishment to the body, especially to children who are below the ages of 5, below the age of 5. Now, talking about no poverty, for instance, to eradicate poverty means to eradicate quite a lot of problems in the world. Okay, now, and we would see, like I mentioned initially, that all of these goals, because I could remember a couple of months ago, I was invited also by this Pune college to give a talk at the conference. It was about the sustainable development goals and the impact of COVID-19. Now, looking at it from this angle, we would see that these goals are so much interwoven. They are so much interconnected. I believe everybody can see my screen. Okay, so now looking at it from this angle, we would see that goal number 8, for instance, which is talking about decent work and economic growth, is going to affect goal number 1, which is no poverty. This is where I am bringing it from, and we would see the reason behind that now. And again, quality education. We know that education is power. Education is the best legacy, like we used to say. And then somebody who is not educated has a higher tendency of, being blessed with poverty. That's what we call that. So being blessed with poverty. And then somebody who has no money, somebody who is not working, how would a person be able to afford reasonable food to eat? That affects zero hunger. So all of these goals actually has quite a lot of interrelationships in between one another. Okay, so from here I would launch the topic I have here for us. The topic I will be presenting here under this theme is strategic actions to ease the impacts of COVID-19 on poverty and food distribution. So please permit me, I wouldn't be able to share slides, but I will share my screen, to show us this document that I have been working on, because I got this notification, the notification to speak at this conference somewhat within a very short period of time, but and we are going through a lot in Nigeria at the moment, but I've been able to put up some things here. So you kindly let us go through that together. So I'm going to share my screen here again for every one of us to be on the same page, okay? Okay, I believe we all can see my screen, all right? Can we all see my screen?
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you. All right, now, like I said, the topic I will be speaking under this theme is the strategic action points to ease the impacts of COVID-19 on poverty and food distribution. The strategic action points to ease the impact of COVID-19 on poverty and food distribution. So I would quickly read from here. So it says, the world has continually been operating under the influence of poverty and hunger. You would agree with me, the world has actually been operating under the influence of poverty and hunger ever since mankind has been in existence. And human beings have learned to cope with the continual existence of this pair. They are a pair, they work together. When there is poverty, there will be hunger. When there is hunger, there will be poverty. Let me say this, in my tradition as a Yoruba guy, we used to say something, and I will speak it in my language. We say, so the implication of that is, once poverty is once hunger is eradicated, then poverty is minimized. I will give you the instances. An old man, an adult, or a young man able to think strategically about how to, strategize and make some ends meet. The thought of such person on a higher percent would be about, how do I get something to eat? Like, I am hungry, how do I get something to eat? But once somebody is able to get and meet up with his daily needs, as far as, getting food to eat and other basic necessities of life are concerned, then such man has a higher tendency of concentrating and thinking strategically to ensure that he or she is able to make up with his or her ends meet. Okay. And again, science proves to us that when somebody is undernourished, especially children of school age are undernourished, there is a high tendency for them to have a kind of mental setback. Mental setback in the sense that their performance compared to students from a wealthy home would be different. And I think I have experienced this because I used to be a teacher before, some times ago. So we see children from middle income to low income family. Most of the times they don't concentrate in the class. I wonder how, children from ages 12 to 14, they still have a way of, portraying what they are passing through or what their parents are passing through as far as finances is concerned. So it affects them in a way. And now I would read on, it says, hence there are a new pair of new phenomenal in the world. So however, the new addendum to this trend is in the experience of the world is the sudden emergence of COVID-19, which is a global pandemic. So no matter how rich a nation could be, there would always be some certain caste or class of people who would be considered poor and hungry when compared with another class of people who seem to have much more than them. Now, meanwhile, the measuring medium for one nation would differ from the other, and this would therefore make way for those who are considered impoverished and hunger it within their own nation to be considered richer than the richest state of another case. Okay, we would see this now. For instance, I believe that many a times, I want us to concentrate. That's why I had to stop sharing my screen. Now, we believe that many of us, no matter the country you are participating from, whenever you hear about Canada, you hear about the United Kingdom, you hear about the United States. Okay, let's make it interactive. Let's make it practical. Mr. Anish, okay, let me not do it that way. Now, we would see that when you call a young boy or call 3 young boys, bring them together, ask each one of them, say the first boy's name is, okay, say A, B, C. A, where would you love to be when you grow up to the age of 25? If you are privileged to travel out of your country to some different nations, where would you love to go? There is a high tendency that such boy would say, oh, I want to be in the US. Why is such boy saying that? Because there is a kind of mentality, there is a kind of orientation that such boy has grown up with in the understanding of what nation is better than the other. There is this understanding as well. We say that there are 3 castes of nations in the world. We say there are developed nations, developing nations, and underdeveloped nations. And under the scope of the United Nations, we see there is a necessity, or should I say there is a responsibility created as a corporate social responsibility for developed nations to help developing nations and underdeveloped nations. So it's all about the measuring, the measuring channels, the measuring media through which poverty is measured. A couple of weeks ago, I was trying to go through some researches, and I learned that, I was reading through some of the nations with high rates of opportunities, nations with high rates of, there was a particular search tag I used. So now what I'm trying to bring out is that there are some peculiar nations that there are ways of, putting nations into categories and castes. as far as poverty is concerned. So now we discovered, like from the illustration I was trying to make the other time, that when you ask 3 boys, where would you guys love to be when you are of age 25? Majority of them would always point out that they want to be in developed nations, even though they do not understand the full concept of what makes them to be referred to as developed nations. Now, the first boy says the United States, the other one says I want to be in the UK, the other one says I want to be in Canada, and recently we see, especially in Africa, people saying I want to go to United Arab Emirates. So that's actually because of the developments going on in those nations. And these developments do not happen without some factors, which includes wealth, which includes their gross domestic product in terms of the goods and services they offer and how much they are able to make from it. Now, the challenge is that with all these monetary values that nations make as their gross domestic product, and even in terms of their wealth as far as natural resources possession is concerned, and several other factors, we discover that certain nations of the world, especially in Africa as a continent, Nigeria, my country inclusive, the world believes that Nigeria is a rich country, and they refer to us as the giant of Africa, and of course we are that. But we discover that even as giants as people refer us to be, we do not make use of our resources as rightly as we should. We see people still staying poor in this rich nation. I was talking to Dr. Shahid or Dr. Vidya Sagar a couple of days ago or thereabout, that there is a massive protest going on in my country, and being a youth and a youth activist, I also had to participate actively in that. Why is there a protest? Why should there be a protest? We have a lot of challenges, we have a lot of problems in this nation, and there is a need for us to rise and say enough is enough to these challenges. Now, all of these also come back to tell on us in terms of the resources possessed by each person. Okay, so let me read on from this document. Okay, so now we say no matter how rich a nation could be, there will always be some certain case of or class of people who will be considered poor and hungry when compared with another class of people who seem to have much more than them. Meanwhile, the measuring medium for one nation will differ from the other, and this would therefore make way for those who are considered impoverished and underhit within the nation. Now, the difference is always within the systems of these two nations under comparison. Okay, so we say this classification is not unpopular. So this classification is not unpopular, but well known to members of each nation, especially the colonial eras and precedents of the Second World War. Now, this portrays certain nations as developed, like I have said it. Now, there is a point I need to bring out here. We say this portrays certain nations as developed, some as developing nations, and others as underdeveloped. So it can therefore be stated that the wealth of a nation is defined by the commonwealth of its people. I'm still trying to establish my point here, okay? So we say the wealth of a nation is defined by the commonwealth of its people. That's actually my own ideology, okay? And again, we now say that this definition notwithstanding is very personal to me, especially with the fact that there are certain spelled out factors, like I have mentioned, with which the economic organizations of the world, like the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank, rate nations of the world per wealth. So this is, like I have mentioned, called the gross domestic product. Then, however, it is noteworthy to state that at this point, there are several factors which determine and affect the rate of poverty in the nation. And that's where we're going to now. Now, there are two definitions for poverty, actually. Two definitions. We have absolute poverty and we have the relative poverty. So when we say poverty relatively, like in terms of specific factors. But when we want to define poverty in terms of finances, we say poverty poverty can be absolute in terms of lacking the basic necessities on a set of income level. This also means that such person who is described as being absolutely poor lives under the absolute poverty line of 1.9 US dollars per day, $1.90. But this was the standard that the world set pre-COVID era. But since the inception of COVID era, we have discovered that there are certain people who live, or should I say, there are certain people who had never experienced poverty in their lives. Permit me to make reference. I work with a couple of clients in the digital industry, and one of my clients, he imports goods from China, and then he would import them to Africa, and then sell his goods in another. He's a resident of Nigeria, but the way he markets his products, so he would get goods shipped in from China into Africa, and then, for instance, in Africa continent, he could get the goods to Kenya, for instance. That was the last deal we did together. So he would go ahead and sell his products out there, his goods out there in Kenya, and then get some money from whatever transaction he could make, get the resources, the money, and use the money to buy some other goods from Kenya to be shipped into Nigeria. That's the way he operates. But when COVID-19 started, it actually met him in China. It was in Wuhan precisely then. That was last year. That was in 2019, November, December. So because of the shut down the economic system, the airlines and all of that in China, so he had to stay back far until March that very same year, March 2020. So by the time he came back to Nigeria, his business was affected. He had, majority of his investments out there in China. He couldn't ship his goods in and all of that. Now, this man, for somebody who is involved in, importation business, is wealthy, is reasonably wealthy. But by the effects of this COVID-19, this man started complaining, having quite a number of issues. Oh, sorry about this. So he has been having quite a number of issues. And, he has been complaining that life has not been the same way as life used to be back then. Now, what am I making reference to this? It is to state and to, ascertain to state the fact and to prove it that quite a number of people who had never experienced poverty before are now experiencing what poverty means. Now, that is somebody who has been making his money in millions. Now, what about people who have never made $1 million in their lives? Put all their salaries together, everything they can make is not up to $1 million. Now, what would be the situation of these people in this nation? So now, what are some of such factors which make poverty relative terminology? We're looking at them. We have hunger, we have lack of shelter, we have illiteracy, education like I referred to it, and then we have lack of quality education, we have poor state of health, we have fear of uncertainties, lack of personal control over life, the way people think, mentality, and all of this. Now, based on my research within this period, I was able to identify three causes of poverty. So I am doing this as a background building so that we would understand how to apply the strategies we are going to be learning together from this conference. Okay. Now we have the cultural causes. The cultural causes. Now, when we say culture, back in primary school, they used to teach us culture is the way of life of men, just as simple as it is. Culture is the way of life of people within a society. But in this context, culture is used in its generic form, in its broad form. So culture is used in its generic term to mean personal or communal development and how they affect the way of one's life. This can also exist in its internal and external elements. So the external factors of poverty classified under this category now include lack of shelter, debts, you see, limited access to clean water and resources, food insecurity, physical disabilities, unemployment, absence of social services. Now, I want to lay emphasis on this. When we mention lack of shelter, we know that somebody who is going to be poor, one of the key things that such person would experience that would actually make us know that this person is poor could be lack of shelter. Somebody who is so much indebted to people monetarily or materially, poor, I mean, that's a sign of poverty. Limited access to clean water and resources. Now, the question is, how does this have anything to do with poverty? How does this have anything to do with finances? Sincerely, it has a lot to do. A friend of mine was sharing with me, he's a senior friend actually. He went to Saudi Arabia as a pilgrim. So by the time he came back to Nigeria, it was like, oh, wow. So he saw a friend of ours wasting water from the tap, he was washing his feet and all of that. So it's like, hey, guy, you're wasting water. If you know how much this costs them in Saudi Arabia, you would know and, value the worth of access to clean water and, some of these minor resources. Now, food insecurity, and I believe this is one of the key factors we are also going to be talking about. Physical disabilities, like I have mentioned, under this food insecurity, when somebody is hungry, there is a high tendency for such person not to be able to think creatively. And then physical disabilities, oh my goodness, we know this. This is not something that I need to explain. Somebody with physical disability has a lower tendency of, competing, equally with somebody who has no physical disability. Unemployment, COVID-19 came into the world and skyrocketed the rate of unemployment in nations. This is not about developing nations alone. Some couple of months ago, when COVID-19 just started, please, are we together, please? Okay, so when COVID-19 just started back then, during the second lockdown, the second extension of the lockdown out there in the United States, I learned that quite a number of people lost their jobs. And we would see that this is one of the changes that COVID-19 has brought into the system of the world. For me, I see COVID-19 as the third world war, like we used to say about it here jokingly, like we are experiencing the third world war. But then, and then just like Donald Trump would refer to it, this is an unseen enemy, whatever. So this is a war declared upon the world by COVID-19. So now in the United States, quite a number of people lost their jobs and people were crying out loud. And we all know the rates, how the rate of COVID-19 was, how it was spreading so virulently like wildfire back there. And this caused a lot of losses for people. Quite a number of people got below the absolute poverty line. A lot of challenges out there. Now, people now had to resort to doing their jobs remotely. But we also have to understand that not all jobs could be done remotely. For instance, hospitality. In the hospitality sector, we have hoteliers, we have hotel owners, we have people who work in the hotel, we have people who even the least person as an employer out there in an hotel is making ends meet by getting whatever amount of money as his or her salary at the end of the month. But whatever the case might be now, we have them not getting their resources no more in Nigeria for quite a number of months before the lockdown was later eased. So this is creating another spectrum, another increase in the rate of poverty. People who have access to at least some reasonable amount of money, which they are managing initially, now living with no money flowing from nowhere. Now, absence of social services, and this is something I would like to lay emphasis on. Please, you would see here, I'm going to highlight this and give it a different color. We say, now look at this, absence of social services. During COVID-19, at the time the governments of nations were trying to, embrace the idea of disbursing palliatives and stuff like that, Nigeria tried it, but the capacity of the federal government here couldn't sustain that. Social organizations, community development organizations, foundations, they are the ones who started donating material things, material goods, and financial, goods to governments and to people directly, just to alleviate the effect of COVID-19 on them. Now, that is something done physically, but I want to say that what you are doing today, what we are doing in terms of conferences, through talks, through emancipation, through orientation, through lectures, and all sorts of things that we do to let people know about what is going on in the world and how they can participate actively in curbing the effects of this COVID-19 is a lot. Because when people do not know, there is a book that says, my people perish for lack of understanding. People tend to go astray when there is no knowledge, when there is no awareness creation, when there is no impacts from different angles to initiate positive changes and impact them rightly with the right values. So absence of social services can also, be classified as an external factor that can initiate poverty. Then gender discrimination, we would see, that was why I started with the Sustainable Development Goals of the United Nations. Gender discrimination, permit me to please say this, Nigeria has 6 geopolitical zones. I am making reference to Nigeria because this is where I know so well. Now, 6 geopolitical zones, like many of you might know, that Nigeria actually has over 250 ethnic groups with over 500 languages. Now, in the northern region of Nigeria, majority of them, the kind of orientation they have there is that, it's even evidential. We see it everywhere, and it has become the talk of different people in this nation. It's giving us concern. There is a high level of gender discrimination out there. It is out there that you would see early marriage of an old man, even if it is an adult, a middle-aged man or whoever, with a young girl of 9 years old in this nation, in this world. It's so absurd. That's a form of, we target that under the Sustainable Development Goals as well. Now, gender discrimination in terms of access to education. There is this traditional mentality, not in the northern region of Nigeria alone, but I believe it also exists in other nations. There is this mentality about not giving equal level of education to a male child as a female child. It's so insane to me. It's not ideal. It causes poverty in a way. Poor infrastructure, poor governance. This is even a key factor. Poor governance, corruption, poor infrastructure. All of these things are capable of causing, high rate of poverty within a nation. And that was why I made reference to Nigeria, my country, in the first instance, that Nigeria being the giant of Africa, as many people refer to us as, and all of that, we still do not live up to the standard we should be living at as a nation, with the kind of resources we have, with the kind of human capacity that we have, with the kind of access to knowledge that we have. But the government of the nation, corruption, poor infrastructure, all of these are causing a high rate of poverty. Yes, and I'm going to prove it in the later part of this. And again, overpopulation. Overpopulation is something, okay, some couple of weeks ago as well, I was trying to learn on the platform of, is it the World Bank? No, on a particular international platform about predictions for coming years. And I could see that China has been predicted by the year 2050 to be the world's topmost, the world's topmost economy by whatever factor, in terms of power, in terms of political influence, in terms of, what do we call it, in terms of innovations, in terms of wealth, in terms of international relations, in terms of everything. And again, India came up that in the next 50 years, India is going to become the second most powerful nation in the world. Now, one of the key considerations that was put in place was population. I'm not saying overpopulation now, population. Population, I mean, in terms of each person who makes up the city, each citizen of a nation has a lot to say about the wealth of such nation. I'm going to address that also later. Now, unequal distribution of wealth, I would call this capitalism. And capitalism is also going to be treated very soon. So let me speed up because of time. Then we have environmental factors like natural disasters, droughts, limited resources, or depletion of natural resources, okay? And again, now the historical causes, I'm going to run through this briefly. So the factors under this include slavery, a nation, that was captured and put into slavery. We have war, and we can trace some of the challenges and the problems of the present day Africa back to slavery, the experience we had with slavery. We see war, we see conquest. Permit me to refer to some nations like Iran, Iraq, and Afghanistan. These nations have been going through series of war, series of national and international crises. And then we have conquests. All of these, they are very obvious that they can cause poverty. Now, the philosophical causes, and this is where I would again appreciate every social organizations in the world. I mean, you see, the social perspective, this attributes poverty to ill distribution of capital, wealth, and resources that favor the interest of the wealthy elite and the financial aristocrats versus the masses. So this perspective calls for equal distribution of wealth as the solution to poverty. And I think I am so much interested in that. And again, there is another perspective to these philosophical causes of poverty. We have the neoliberal capitalist perspective. So this school of thought attributes poverty to the centralization of markets, of free markets, sole government ownership of business enterprises, decapitalization, these states' condition for poverty eradication has been based on the profitable private investment of individuals rather than depending on the government to run the affairs of a nation's business for the people's profit. So capitalism has its side effects and it has its benefits, of course. Like we know, there is nothing that has advantages without having disadvantages. But for me, and of course, I believe for majority of us who are here today, we believe in the ideology of socialism, ensuring that one person do not amass the wealth that should belong to 100 people to himself. And the foundation of this goes back to corruption. It goes back to corruption. When you see nations of the world, I read about a particular kingdom I won't mention. The nation is, the leader of the nation was known to have over 2,000 fleet of cars in his own compound, customized for him and all of that, while the people of the nation are there suffering. This is craziness. Corruption, poor governance. Okay, and again, there is this levels of poverty. Yeah, we have to quickly go through this. Levels of poverty. Poverty gets level. Like we say it here in Nigeria, jokingly, poverty gets level. For instance, now, like I have said that, for instance, when we compare nations of the world, we say one nation is richer than the other. The same thing applies to human beings as constituents of a nation. So when we see somebody, we say this person is richer than this, based on monetary value, based on assets, based on personal capacity, based on intelligence or whatever. Now, there are levels to poverty, and I'm going to be referring to absolute poverty now. We have the micro level and the macro level of poverty. So we now say that while micro level causes of poverty covers all factors that are capable of affecting the economic state of few individuals, then just like the name implies, macro, huge, massive, big. So macro level causes of poverty covers all factors that are capable of affecting the large population of the people, the whole nation, and even the world at large. We are getting to my point gradually. Now, one of such essential causes of macro level poverty which can also be global in its impact, is a regional or global pandemic. And this is where we are driving across to. Now, look at it. The dimensions of poverty now. Don't forget the last statement given here, that a macro level of poverty, that is a huge level of poverty, can be caused by the impact of a pandemic, which is global or regional. Just like we have Lassa fever in West Africa some times ago, we have Ebola virus, we have different forms of viruses and diseases. In Africa, we had malaria and HIV/AIDS, everything. Of course, these are not peculiar to Africa as a continent alone, but we have them in different nations of the world. Now, COVID-19, like we all know, it's no more a news, it's no more a news story to tell us that COVID-19 as a pandemic has been affecting the whole world and not just a few nations. Now, CIDA is an international organization, and they published a document titled COVID-19 and Dimensions of Poverty, the Poverty Toolbox. This was published in May 2020. So in their reports about the impact of COVID-19 pandemic on poverty, they were able to identify four dimensions of poverty as far as COVID-19 is concerned now. According to CIDA, being poor in terms of resources means not having access to power over resources that can be used to sustain a decent living standard and improve one's life. Resources can be both material and non-material, e.g. decent home and all of that. Now, being poor in terms of opportunities and choice concerns what possibility you have to develop or use your resources so as to move out of poverty. And this would actually lead us to talking about some of the strategies that we need to make. I want you to take note of this. It says, taking opportunities and choice concerns that possibility you have to develop and use your resources so as to move out of poverty. What are the resources that we have that we can use personally to move out of poverty at the post-COVID era? These are some of the things we are going to be talking about. Now, access to, for example, social services, infrastructure, capital, land, natural resources, they all affect the opportunities and choices of people to become poor or rich. So being poor through lack of power and voice, and this is something that has to do with the people, because, sorry, I am speaking from the spirit of what is happening currently in Africa, what is happening currently in Nigeria, especially, because what is happening in Nigeria, my country at the moment, is affecting Africa, and it's become something that the whole world speaks about. Now, power and voice. This relates to the ability of people to articulate their concerns, their needs, their rights in an informed way, and to take part effectively, in decision making that relates to these concerns. And that is why this also has a lot, poverty has a lot to do with the government, the impact and influences of the government over it. Okay, so let me run through that and now go through the last one. The last dimension is being poor in terms of human security. This implies that violence and insecurity are constraints to different groups and individuals' possibilities to exercise their human rights and find paths out of poverty. I would say this, I do not mean to offend anybody, but one of the key causes of poverty, as far as this human security is concerned in a way strategically, is religion. There are certain religions in the world who teach some dogmatic, ideas that leave people poor for the rest of their lives, for the whole of their lives. In a way, we are going to talk about that later. Okay. So according to CIDA, a person living in poverty is resource poor. Look at this, resource poor, and also poor in one or several other dimensions. Okay. Now that shows that poverty is not just about lacking resources. Resources is a key value, and that is why you will discover that the first goal of the United Nations is no poverty. because resources are essential to eradicating poverty. But beyond resources, we have people who have resources but still do not know what to make use of the resources for to eradicate poverty in their personal life. And I want to say that once poverty is eradicated in a single person's life, poverty is eradicated in a matrix system. Eradicate poverty in my life, I will eradicate poverty, at least, or minimize poverty in the life of somebody next to me. And somebody next to me would have the tendency and the potential to eradicate poverty or limit it or reduce it in the life of the next person. It creates a matrix system. One person influences two, two persons influences four, four persons influences six, and so on. A tree. So the ability of social organizations, social activities to emancipate and orientate people about how to get out of poverty is a key determinant factor of eradicating poverty in the world. Now, what are the impacts of COVID-19 on poverty? This is actually so much, but I'm going to run through it very quickly. So in the reality of the theme under consideration for this study, coronavirus 2019 being a pandemic is a virulent macro factor. Don't forget the levels of poverty we referred to back then. Macro factor that is capable of causing poverty on its own. Causing poverty on its own without any other factor at work together with it. Nonetheless, there are so many other poverty-causing factors already on ground that have been at work prior to the inception of this pandemic. You would agree with me. People are struggling. Before COVID-19, people are still struggling. People are hustling to make ends meet. But when always work remotely, being a digital consultant, I can work anywhere, no matter where I am. I just relocated out of my previous state. Professor knows about that. I relocated out of my previous state to the state where I am now, and I still make, I still meet up with the demands and the needs of my clients in the former location, and I still try to get new clients in this new location. That's for me. That's for people who can work remotely. But what about people who cannot work remotely and there is an imposed lockdown over states, over nations, and over almost every regions of the world, all as a way of curbing COVID-19? So this must definitely have quite a lot of effect on, on poverty eradication as it is concerned, okay? Now, this pandemic has come to hit us at a time of immense global challenges. This is stated by the World Bank organization. And the virus has brought a risk like no other the world has faced in recent decades in terms of its potential economic and social impacts. Okay, we would remember the 11/11 events, how it affected the whole world, happening in a single nation, but affecting the whole world. Now, this is happening in the whole world and affecting the whole world. Now, the World Bank, as at April, please take care of this analysis and see the impact of COVID-19. Watch carefully, please. Now, look at this. As at April 23, 2020, the World Bank has estimated that its effect, that is the effect of COVID-19 on poverty, can push about 49 million people into extreme poverty. Let me underline that, into extreme poverty in 2020. Look at that, extreme poverty. Like I told you that poverty gets level, poverty is in levels, okay? So now back then, as at April 23, 2020, 49 million people were predicted to go into extreme poverty in 2020, not just ordinary poverty, extreme poverty. Now, with 47%, which is 23 million of this imagined new poor, being from the sub-Saharan African region. Oh, sorry, I didn't have so much time to get some resources and put it here so that you would see the map of these locations. But I want you to picture it now. The sub-Saharan African nation includes, Mali, it includes Niger, it includes Benin Republic, it includes Nigeria, it includes it includes, what's the name of this nation? Permit me to quickly check through this map. So there are different nations out there. Okay, yeah, we have in the sub-Saharan region, we have Nigeria, we have Ghana, we have Togo, we have Niger, we have Chad, we have Cameroon. Now, all of these nations put together, the research of the World Bank says that 47% of the extreme poverty estimated or predicted as of April 23, 2020 will be from the sub-Saharan region of Africa, which includes the country I have mentioned. And that 32% will be from South Asia. And I believe, as I can see here, South Asia includes India, it includes Pakistan, it includes, Bangladesh and all of that. Now, look at it now. That was in April 23. Now, however, by October 7, 2020, as of October 7, 2020, can we calculate the distance? I mean, the time interval, April, May, June, July, September, October, just within 5 months now. The World Bank has now returned. The World Bank has returned with another prediction that is formulated based on the studied trend of events influenced by the pandemic within 5 months. Now, the new statements given by the World Bank now states that the pandemic will now push between 88 million. Can you imagine the difference? Between initially it was 99 million people into extreme poverty. Now it is 88 million to 115 million into extreme poverty by when? By the end of the year 2020, just in a single year. And I'm going to show us a mapping, a graphical representation I was able to lay my hands on to explain this. Now, the difference of 49 million to 88 to 115 million. Now there is a range now. I believe they put this range because they have learned a lesson from the previous analysis done in April 23 or reported in April 23 that there was going to be 49 million people who would run into extreme poverty. But now, if we are predicting again, there is a tendency that we have 88 million and 150 or 115 million people who would run into extreme poverty by the end of the year 2020. Now, this state of poverty is not relative. I explained the difference between relative and absolute poverty the other time, okay? Now, this state of poverty is not about a relative poverty. Okay, maybe the person doesn't have shelter. Maybe the person do not have access to good, good and quality water to drink or stuff like that. Maybe the person does not have access to quality education. Maybe the person does, those ones are relative poverty. But now, absolute poverty, the ability of a person to live between, to live and earn at least in a day $1.90 US. Now that shows that this is really so how do I describe it? It's pathetic. It's so disturbing to me. And we are seeing the reality. Like I made reference to the fact that people who had never experienced poverty, and I think the terminology was used, that you see there is a terminology here, the new poor, amazing. Okay, so we have the new poor now. There is a terminology given them, the new poor. And one thing about the new poor is that these are people who had been rich or people who had been living their lives between low and medium income. At least they are still making up with their daily needs. But now, these new poor would be people who have been living between middle income earning ability and high income earning ability, now falling below the poverty line. It's crazy, it's weird, really. Now, the analysis given again in October 7, it changes. Don't forget that in April 23, 2020, the analysis states that a higher percentage of these emerging new poor would be from the sub-Saharan African region. And that was actually because of the World Health Organization's prediction. If you have been following the international news, a couple of months ago, you would remember that the World Health Organization predicted that the impact of COVID-19 in terms of its widespread might be very, very dangerous in Africa. especially in densely populated nations like Nigeria. But thank God our government was able to bring up, and follow the internationally recommended mitigation measures. But don't forget that these mitigation measures also have a negative and downside impact on on the poverty level of the people. People who are working, their money by earning salaries. Okay, I think I'm supposed to be rounding off now. I can see you, Dr. Shahid. Okay, please return it. All right, so people who should be making their money and all of that are being restricted from going to work and all of that. So let me quickly run through this. That was for sub-Saharan, that this would be more in the sub-Saharan region. But back into, October 27 now, it is now predicted or even seen based on the normal, okay, yes, look at it. It says, following the report, more than 80% of those who will fall into this predicted category of extreme poverty are in the middle income countries of the world, with South Asia as the most affected region, followed by sub-Saharan Africa. So that shows that the trend has actually changed over time. Now moving from South Asia to sub-Saharan Africa. Initially, it was sub-Saharan Africa taking the lead in terms of its effects. Now it has turned back to South Asia. And the recent analysis I got just this morning before coming up was that the Southeast and the South Asia will be affected even the most. So all of these are actually proofs to show that COVID-19 has impact on poverty. And so let me conclude this way. I actually still have, this is a document of 23 pages, and I've been able to cover just 8 pages, okay? So now this shows that, poverty, COVID-19, hunger, the three of them now, let me quickly combine them together and treat them all at once because of time. Okay, now poverty, the inability of a man to have access to quality education, the inability of a man to buy quality food, the inability of a man to buy something that would nourish his body system, all lie on, money, I should say finances. That shows that somebody who is going to live above the poverty line should be somebody who has a reasonable, a reasonable source of income that is not going to be so much affected by the impact of COVID-19. And now, poverty and hunger, they are so much interrelated in the sense that when somebody is poor, then there is a high tendency that such person having access to quality food and nutrition is going to be on a very low percentage. So permit me to quickly go through the strategies that we need to consider, okay? So I said I was going to make reference to this initially. So this is the map, the graphical representation we have initially. So the pandemic will reverse progress in reducing world poverty. There was a goal to eradicate poverty, to bring poverty to zero level. Now the forecast initially from 2015 is that there has been 10%, poor people in the world, 10% of the people in the world having or living on up to 1.90 US dollars per day. But now it has been dropping based on the work of social activities and different organizations, including the United Nations, to curb and bring a downturn of the trend. Now, until 2019, you would see the trend until 2019. Now, in 2019, there is a resurge upwards towards 9.5% of the population. Meanwhile, it was projected and has been worked on to become something around 8.3% of the total world population. Now it's going to skyrocket back to 9.5. That's the prediction. And that's actually COVID-19 on the downside. But on the baseline, it's going to be around 8.5 and 9.0. That's the COVID-19 baseline. So this is actually very weird. And there is a lot that organizations like, Pune College of Arts, Science, and Commerce can also do. And what are the things, what are the strategies we need to put in place? Now, the first one, permit me to quickly share this with you. So I'm going to quickly, because if I have to go through my own document, it's going to take a lot of time. So I'll quickly share this. Can you see this, please? Can you see this new document I'm trying to open? Ms. Rafat, can you see this?
No, sir.
Okay, I'm gonna have to check it. Sorry for taking your time, please. I was just talking and I never knew I had spent so much time. Okay, so I need to share this with us. Okay, now what are the things we need to do quickly? What are the things we need to do? The first recommendation given, I'm going to bring it out from the United Nations directly. So the first recommendation is to mobilize to save lives and livelihoods, focusing their attention where the risk is most acute. We say, although we cannot yet fully, predict the precise impact of the COVID-19 pandemic because it's unfolding every day, but we need to support people in time of great need. And look at this now. There is a need for us to preserve critical humanitarian food and nutrition assistance and all of these. There is a need for us to declare food production, marketing, and distribution as essential service. I believe in some nations, this is not the case because some nations do not group or categorize, food production, agricultural businesses as essential services. They give access to only medical practitioners and refer to them as essential services provision or providers. Okay, so there is a need now for us to consider the protection of workers and keep trade corridors open within among nations. So this way, I'm going to share this document with Dr. Vidya Sagar. I want to make sure I pronounce the name correctly. Please permit me if I didn't get it clearly. So I'm going to share this document with him, and I believe that once it's ready, we all will have access to it all together so that we can, see the strategies that are recommended by the United Nations. So at this point, I want to appreciate, I think I've been talking about poverty, but I've been able to relate it with, hunger and everything that has to do with food production and food distribution. There is a lot to that. So, and I believe that after this conference or during this conference, Dr. Vidya Saga would share the document with us all so that we can go through it. So at this point, I am concluding and I want to appreciate everybody once again. Thank you for having me. Thank you for taking the time to have me to talk to this population. And I should say this before I go, please. Honorable Mrs. Rafat, you or maybe Dr. Rafat, spare me, please. You refer to me as a professor. I'm not a professor, please. I'm not yet a doctor. I'm a normal citizen. So I'm looking to becoming such someday. And I should say Professor after has been a motivation. So thank you for having me, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Thank you, sir, for providing your valuable inputs on the topic. Now I request our second speaker, Dr. Anish Chakravarti, to enlighten us with his knowledge.
Okay, am I audible to you, ma'am?
Yes, sir, yes.
All right. A very good evening to all of you. I would brief myself up quickly about what I want to speak on. I would like to quickly thank the principal, the vice principal, the convener, and my former colleague, Dr. Shahid, for organizing and this webinar and giving me a platform to speak here. Also, I would like to thank Dr. Vidya Sagar, who had been in touch with me constantly and had been, guiding me for being a part of this webinar. Without wasting much time, I would like to share my screen and present my talk. Am I allowed to share the screen, please?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. You can share.
Okay. Is it visible? Can you see the screen?
Yes, sir. We can see your screen.
Okay. So, all right. So basically, I'm not a social activist. I'm not an economist. I'm not a political scientist. I'm a person from philosophy. So as a philosopher, we look into the foundations and the fundamental issues that concern any problem that we deal with, whether it is a problem related to the world, whether it is a problem related to ideas. And today's topic that I'm going to speak on is, on global poverty and justice, a Rawlsian account. Now, basically, the theme of my talk will be focusing on the idea of justice and poverty, with a particular reference to, the political thinker called John Rawls. John Rawls is a very popular thinker among the political, scenarios as well as in political philosophy, who emerged as one of the most important thinkers in 20th century. And he was American, and he wrote two major works. He wrote a lot of works, but two of his major works, Theory of Justice and Political Liberalism, which came up in 1903, and the previous one in 71 was one of the revolutionary works, very highly influential works in modern philosophical and political thought. And if you can see, he gave important concepts of justice as fairness, of original position, wheel of ignorance, and reflective equilibrium. And in his political liberalism, he gave important concepts to deal with issues concerning political equality and justice by talking of overlapping consensus, primal goods, liberal neutrality, and public reason. Now, moving on, my talk basically will talk about as to how, in what way, the foundational issues can be dealt to curb the problem of poverty and hunger and penury. So to do that, I basically have taken the aid of John Rawls, who is a liberal thinker and who has talked of justice in an absolute equation with fairness. So my talk mostly will not be bringing up really very practical issues and concerns about the problem that exists in the world, but it would be focusing on more on the fundamental problems that exist, perhaps which leads to issues concerning poverty and injustice. So coming to the idea, I'll quickly brief up the modern problems. I mean, of course, the speaker before me very clearly and very beautifully brought out the significant problems that exist at the global level. But I would like to read this quick quote, which says that, no task should command higher priority to the world policymakers than that of reducing poverty. This command or this statement came up in the World Bank Forum on the World Development Report in 1990. So the fact that there is poverty in the world is not a new problem. It's not a problem which concerns itself only limiting to pandemic, but it's one of the major global issues, as Mr. Solomon also brought that out. Now, I would like to read this quotation that John Rawls wrote. I would not take much time, but there are certain things that I would need to read and explain in order to make sense of what I'm trying to argue. If you see this quotation that John Rawls said, it's the first line of his very book, and it sums up the very idea that he wants to propagate to remove the problems that persist. He said, justice is the first virtue of social institutions, as truth is of systems of thought. A theory, however elegant and economical, must be rejected or revised if it is untrue. Likewise, laws and institutions, no matter how efficient and well arranged, must be reformed or abolished if they are unjust. So the point is not to have a regular and a very systematic institutionalization of organization, but the point is to be just. Each person possesses an inviolability founded on justice that even the welfare of society as a whole cannot override. For this reason, justice denies that the loss of freedom of some is made right by a greater good shared by others. It does not allow that the sacrifices imposed on a few are outweighed by the larger sum of advantages enjoyed by many. Therefore, in a just society, the liberties of equal citizenship are taken as settled. The rights secured by justice are not subject to political bargaining or to the calculus of social interests. So what John Rawls clarifies is that if we really want to remove problems concerning fairness and justice, we have to ensure very clearly, to deal with practical problems that we deal in the world, is to take away the imbalance and the hierarchies that exist when we try to relate things with justice. And so the concern is that we must try to no matter whatever organization we talk of, any political organization, organization, whether it is at the level of nation, whether it is the level at a social level or at an institutional level. Everywhere we have to ensure that the fairness principle is maintained. So how we define justice, justice is defined through the to the concept of absolute fairness. Now, moving on, I've tried to relate this justice and equality concept with the idea of self-respect of poor. So, if you see here, Rawls says that, the most important aspect of seeing the perspective of the poor is to, make rules of its own expressions. That, for example, just a second, sorry. Yeah. So if you see, for example, if fellow citizens are treated with respect, they will both have opportunities to influence public decisions, and such decisions will be justified to them on the grounds they can accept. If, however, powerful citizens are allowed to manipulate or steamroll public decisions at the expense of poor citizens and on the basis of reasons provided the poor citizens reject, they are showing them disrespect. So what is the fundamental idea that is joined to the idea of justice and the remover of poverty is the idea of self-respect. We have to equalize the idea of self-respect of every citizen. The idea of merit does not have to be based on the idea of economical profit that one may have. Now, he says further, the Rawls have tried to propagate the idea that if a just society will have a system of rules aimed at efficient and mutually advantageous social cooperation that produces greater benefits and advantages for everyone involved. For poor peoples, Rawls' way of determining a fair distribution will be comforting, as not the superior economic, social, military powers of the rich and powerful will determine a just distribution, but a common point of view where their perspectives are included. So the idea of finding a common resolution is significant for Rawls, and he therefore laid down his fundamental philosophy, which could be perhaps taken into account for the government policies, the constitutions, and also to the policy makers who talk about and decide on the rules of free market, of exchange of economics, goods, and capital. So conflict of interests can be settled by appealing by mutually agreed to principles of justice, providing a fair, impartial, and objective viewpoint from which to resolve disputes. So the idea of self-respect is necessarily joined to the idea of justice and the idea of poverty by Rawls. Further, he says that in order to understand this more clearly, we have to understand the relation and the structure that is there between justice and poverty. I'm sorry. So he says that, to summarize, he says that, he says that the basic structure as the primary object to which principles of justice ought to apply, poor people would totally agree with these reasons. Apart from defining the citizens' rights and duties, the basic structure in most societies contain especially deep inequalities, strongly affecting one's chances in life. So what we should do is basically to try to see different social positions and find out the inequality and come up with a problem which is come up with a view which is called the original position and wheel of ignorance. What is original position according to Rawls? Since I do not have much time, I'll try to explain it in my own way to make it sense to you. The idea of original position is that any sovereign institution which is controlling a nation must be able to have a basic theoretical foundation, which Rawls saying is the idea of justice as fairness, where justice is not compromised at any level for the greater good of the greater people, or for any other profits that could be meaning, or becoming biased for others. And we have to ensure that we have these basic rules, and we begin with our institution based on that original position. Now, based on this idea, we move on to apply those policies and theories based on the idea of justice as fairness at the original position, and see how it affects the practical aspect or the functionality of that policy. Now, what is the wheel of ignorance concept, which he attaches to the idea of original position? He says that the idea of, that the wheel of ignorance is that the people who are sanctioned to do legal jobs have to ascertain out of the written rule that they would not be prioritizing anywhere as to what kind of people, in the sense of what are their cultural affiliations, religious affiliations, or whether they are gendered, like whether we prioritize a gender, social, cultural situations to the society to decide what should be the laws. Rawls says that we have to be absolutely liberal in order to maintain that. And in order to do this, we need to have a veil of ignorance. The authority, the stakeholders, the policymakers must be very ignorant about what are the situations occurring, what are the, not the situations, but what are the religious, cultural affiliations that people acquire to, so that there may be no biasness and there's no recognition of the people who are making those laws from the ones who are making them. So, for example, if we are males, we could perhaps maybe more biased towards males if we are making those laws. If we are having a particular religious influence on us as a policy maker, I'm more influenced in a religion. I may be making laws which may favor my own particular people of religion and not favor others or the minorities. So the idea of wheel of ignorance, which of course is a very technical idea, since I do not have much time now to talk about it, I just brief up the basic definition of it. And another very important point that Rawls talks of it, that's one very important dimension that comes to see the idea of justice and its relation to poverty. And the structure is to take care of the idea that it has the idea that poverty has its effect on children. The idea of children is very significantly taken into account by Rawls in his work, which generally and largely we see it in as much of his papers and the monographs that he wrote. And he said that that any way of ascertaining justice is basically to, and to see the idea of poverty is to see that the children and the most minor citizens of any nation are taken into consideration of being and having access to all the rights and functions. So if you see the World Bank also, in 2001 forum of their development report stated most children from the poorest households have no schooling at all. In some poor societies, children are required to earn money by working like adults, and this happens most often at the expense of schooling. Now, what Rawls says is that these kinds of injustice, corruption, problems, and all wherever we see that the breachment of justice is happening, which one big result of it is poverty, is happening because the fundamental concepts that have been laid down are not right. More than the idea of functioning of them, there is a problem with the way there are the concepts which have been used to function and apply in the world problems are themselves compromising themselves, are compromised. So coming to the idea of Rawlsian equality, the idea of a Rawlsian understanding, for John Rawls' idea of equality and poor people, we see that you know he maintains that there has three further focus on the points of poor people. He says if we want to really remove away the idea, we must understand firstly that the loss of respect is so bad that the social conditions that undermine self-respect ought to be avoided almost at any cost. So the idea of respect, the idea of equality, the idea of dignity of a human being cannot be overridden. Why does he judge loss of respect such a disaster? His description of the psychological condition of loss of self-respect is akin to depression, as well as some of the negative feelings that poor people often experience. People may either feel that nothing is worth doing, or they might have lost the motivation or will to do worthwhile things. So it's not that we can actually leave poor people at their wit and will, because they are mostly dealing with sudden and extreme sort of lack of motivation and depression. And this problem is very much resultant because of the lack of equality we create. With loss of self-respect, people feel their desires and activities have become empty and vain, and they thus sink into apathy and cynicism. So you will see mostly poor people therefore become rebellious, violent. One of those sources of loss of self-respect is that some citizens must unfairly accept a lesser prospect of life for the sake of others. So we maintain that equality and ideality in them, that they must definitely live a lower life so that the others can live in better ways. And he says further, the respect owed to each citizen must be affirmed in public institutions and be embodied in constitution of society. What does this mean? He says, well, equal treatment according to the first principle provides the basis of self-respect in a just society. So the idea of fairness must firstly deal with the idea that the psyche of the people, the very basic of the understanding of the people have to change. The idea of reciprocal advantage and mutual benefit is very significant to maintain equality as fairness. The idea of means and ends have to change with the idea of mutual benefit. And this has to be a check on this all the time. Rawls' further commitment is that those citizens who have been fortunate in terms of the natural talents they're born with or had the good luck of growing up in favorable social circumstances, should not exploit these contingencies, which they did not deserve at the cost of the less fortunate people. Rather, they must be prepared to use their good fortune for the benefit of those people who are in worst off in society. And it is not their autonomous choice, but the law should be taking care. The idea of justice, if entailed in those laws, will be taking care of that. Moving further, Rawls has a very strong sense of critique towards utilitarianistic theories. Well, to define basically the idea of utilitarianism, which is largely the summum bonum of many political institutions in the world, is that the idea of principle of the greatest happiness of the greatest number. Now, one attack that utilitarian theories, give is against the idea of the functioning of a good society and civilizations is that we cannot practically make everybody happy. We cannot practically be just to everybody. So let's be realistic and not idealistic about these views. And pertaining to that idea, we see what that we see that we believe that instead of being so idealistic, let's be practical and accept the fact, which is the idea of utilitarianism given by Bentham, Mill, Sidgwick, and many other thinkers, that the principle of the greatest happiness of the greatest number is what should be the idea of justice. So at the cost of some lower minority people, we can if it's possible, we can essentiate the idea of justice and move on to give the idea of global happiness of people. So Rawls is, as per the definition we saw in the very first slide, he explicitly rejects any kind of utilitarian justification of equalities. For him, sacrifice imposed on some citizens for the sake of a larger sum of advantages enjoyed by many, or to acquiesce in enduring loss so as to bring out a greater net balance of satisfaction are not acceptable. Why does Rawls say so? He believes that citizens who are in one another's equal would never agree to any principle that would require them to take such sacrifices or acquiesce in such losses. The idea is that people themselves may not be able to be so pure to do that. Significant to note is that Rawls gives poor people a choice through the original position that what social arrangement they would accept from a basis of equality. This choice, although as theoretical mechanism, restores poor people's self-respect, as poor people throughout the world are mostly coerced into acquiescence of the desperate circumstances they find themselves in. They are acknowledged and respected as human beings who deserve treatment on par with everyone else and well-being and taken into consideration as much as everyone else. So what is the way to curb up this idea of utilitarianism, that let's think of the greater good, the greater number of people, and at the stake of few people? Well, we must have a say and a forum where the poor people are allowed to mention their problems, mention their things that they desire. It's very important to propagate for a political institution to do that. And only then, according to Rawls, they can maintain their self-respect, and the idea of poverty can be then dissipated. So, I already talked briefly about the idea of the original position and the idea of the real ignorance. And what is basically the point is that there has to be the idea of contract between the government and between its citizens has to be absolutely based on mutual cooperation for Rawls. And he says that two big important views that can tailor this is the original position and the wheel of ignorance. And the idea is of dynamism. The laws that we do or make should not be absolutely fixed and rigid based on the ideas of the policy makers. Policy makers are the mere mediums to relate or to find out what should be done for the sake of the most poor people. Rawlsian idea comes very close to the idea of Gandhi, that we must look up to the idea of the most poor when we are making our laws. Think of the most poor people. You're reminded of the Gandhi's talisman there. Also, Rawls' added feature is the idea of children, which is generally looked out mostly by the people of societies. Rawls said that if you really want to see if the country is functioning in a just manner, look at how privileged the children and the schooling and the ways of nurturing children is there in that society. If a society is undermining children and the nourishment of children and their progress and development, then that society is ill will. So, this idea, there's many things to talk about roles, but because of the scarcity of time, I cannot take those ideas. So just to brief up the main significant point of John Rawls, who's such an important thinker of the 20th century philosophy and politics, that I thought that it should be important to bring this up to the idea of pandemic situations. Rawls' theoretical construction, he wants to say that there has to be a legitimacy of claims of the ideas of justice, and to take good of others into account and bring it out to the idea of global level. Further, I want to conclude mostly by saying that behind the principle that all inequalities must be to the benefit of society least advantaged members lies the idea that undeserved inequalities resulting from natural, fortunate, and social positions call for redress. We need a redressal. Alternatively put, those more fortunate can only benefit from the use of their assets in a way that provides compensating advantages to those who have lost out. So, with this, I kind of to conclude my dissertation by talking of the idea of justice with the society. Rawls maintained that in order to access real reformations, we must take into account the sociological developments and the developments of justice. So with this idea, I almost conclude my talk. I'm sorry I did not had enough time to bring up my presentation in a much clearer manner. And for this reason, I just summarized my uh, uh, point. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, sir, for providing your valuable inputs for the topic. Now I request Dr. Vidyasagar Sangram for vote of thanks. Dr. Vidyasagar. I request Dr. Vidyasagar Sangram for vote of thanks. Respected Principal Dr. Aftab Anwar Sheikh, HOD of Economics, Dr. Shari, thank you all for giving a valuable time. It's my privilege to propose a vote of thanks speech and acknowledge the contribution of those who have worked really hard to make this day a successful event. I, on behalf of the Economics Department of Pune College of Arts, Science and Commerce, extend my most sincere thanks to the Almighty God and for making the day event a success. And even on behalf of the institution, I thanks to our guest, chief guest, the Solomon sir and Dr. Anish Chakravarti, who removed time for their busy schedule to grace the occasion. Again, thank you everyone for their participation. So with this, we are ending for the first day webinar. Tomorrow we'll meet on the same time for the second day at 4 p.m. Thank you all.